Okay. Good morning. My name is Anisa, coordinator of the National Shelter Movement of South Africa. Welcome to our monthly webinar session. This morning, we will be looking at human trafficking, or what they're calling trafficking in persons, acronym TIP. It's becoming a big problem in South Africa, a modern day form of slavery. It's a violation of human rights. We're having a big problem with both adult and child trafficking, labor exploitation, sexual exploitation, and this is definitely affecting communities, individuals, and South Africa as a whole. I also, believe or not believe, but there's a big problem in terms of gender-based violence and femicide and the relationship with human trafficking and migrants. So those are interrelated topics, and we have Renee this morning who's going to take us through the presentation. And I will leave you to her trusted hands or expertise to share her presentation. But before I do that, just a little bit about Renee Hanekom. She's a qualified community developer with over 16 years of experience in empowering communities. From 2015 to 2021, she led the National Human Trafficking Hotline in South Africa, focusing on victim identification, support services, and strengthening national referral mechanisms. She has consistently been working in professional training and strategic workshops, particularly for frontline professionals. From 2021 to 2025, as recently as that. She worked in communications and marketing while continuing anti-trafficking work as a consultant and forum member. Renee now serves as the Equal Capacity Building Program Coordinator at the National Freedom Network, which Renee, I'm sure, will share a little bit more information about the NFN as well. So there you have it. Very, very great opportunity for Renee to share with us what she knows about trafficking in person. So without any further delay, Renee, I will hand over to you. And after the presentation, we will have opportunity for questions and answers. Although, Renee, it's entirely up to you if you want to engage people during the presentation as well. So we'll go with your cue. Thank you very much. Enjoy the presentation.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Anisa, and your team for putting this presentation together today. It's my honor to be with you all and to share with you a little bit more. I will definitely share more on what the National Freedom Network is all about. So firstly, just where we began. The National Freedom Network was launched in May 2011 with the purpose to connect counter-trafficking organizations and role players across the movement. It's really grown into South Africa's national counter-trafficking network. So what does NFN do? Basically, we act as a point of connection in the counter-trafficking field. We facilitate the flow of information and sharing of resources. So we really encourage collaboration between sectors. We also function as a communication channel across the movement. In terms of our partnerships, there's a strong collaboration with government-driven counter-trafficking structures, and I'll get into that a little bit later. We have active engagement at provincial and national levels with the provincial trafficking task teams. And then we also have alignment with formal structures established over the past decade. In terms of our vision, basically all sectors of society, we want them to be united and organized to prevent and combat trafficking in persons. And our mission is really to effectively fight trafficking in persons through strategic networking, collaboration, and partnership. In terms of our program areas, I just want to give you a little bit of an idea of the programs that we provide. So we have comprehensive programs for survivor support, stakeholder empowerment, and systemic change. In terms of support, I would like to introduce you to our survivor mobilization project. And that's really the foundation of our support services. It reflects our commitment to journey with victims of human trafficking towards becoming survivors and ultimately, as we like to call them, thrivers. Our commitment is to holistic support. And so we support victims, survivors, and thrivers by providing safe accommodation in terms of referrals, meeting their basic needs such as food and clothing. And this support ensures their stability and dignity on the road to recovery. Looking ahead in terms of future enhancements that we would like to make, the National Freedom Network is planning to expand our support by offering psychosocial support, access to mental health services, and we really believe that these additions will aim to strengthen long-term survivor empowerment and reintegration. Then in terms of our EQUIP program, which is the program that I'm coordinating, this is a tailored capacity building program for our network. So what we do is we identify the unique training needs of our network members. That includes NGOs, government departments, and law enforcement. And then we develop targeted sessions to address these gaps. Our key focus areas include victim identification, trauma-informed care, legal frameworks, and then also intersectoral collaboration. So regular participation from government officials really strengthens this cross-sector coordination and we believe enhances frontline responses. And together, we can build a more effective, united front against human trafficking across South Africa. In terms of our Connect branch, we connect for impact. So we believe that networking is central to our ability to achieve our mission. And we do this by building strong relationships with individuals, organizations, and communities. And we expand our reach, strengthen collaboration, and facilitate the exchange of knowledge and resources. So through these connections, we're able to mobilize support, advocate effectively, and drive meaningful change. We also have a digital platform called NFN Online, which plays a key role in this. And this really serves as a hub for counter-trafficking stakeholders across South Africa and globally through our international partnerships. So I would really encourage those of you who are not part of that platform to please sign up and become a member of the NFN Hub. In terms of our advocacy program, we do advocacy and research. Now, the NFN represents civil society on the National Intersectoral Committee, and as I mentioned previously, key provincial task teams, and we do that in Gauteng, the Western Cape, and KZN. And this is where we are able to contribute to national anti-trafficking policies. We also guide and vet all human trafficking research in South Africa. And the aim of that is to ensure ethical standards and connecting researchers to relevant stakeholders. In terms of our prevention program, this is information sessions that are aimed at raising awareness of trafficking in persons, and it's an ad hoc function that we provide upon request, but we can refer to the public to our members who specialize in prevention and awareness raising in other communities where we are not located. Then in terms of understanding human trafficking, I think it's important for us to get into, as Anissa said, the global impact of human trafficking. So trafficking in persons really affects almost every country worldwide. It's a criminal enterprise that's based on the demand and supply of cheap labor, commercial sex, body parts, and organs. So what is TIP? TIP involves the kidnapping or deception of individuals who are then sold and exploited for profit. And traffickers make money through forced labor, sexual exploitation, or the illegal trade of organs and body parts. Now, victims of trafficking can be any age, race, gender, or nationality. It's not exclusive to any specific person. They're often in vulnerable situations, however, such as economic hardship, conflict, or natural disasters, and I'm going to get into that shortly. And even in stable circumstances, people can fall prey to traffickers through false promises of jobs, education, or relationships. Looking at exploitation and control, traffickers use violence, manipulation, or coercion to control victims, and many victims are too traumatized or fearful to seek help, and some might not even recognize themselves as victims. So how do we identify and respond to trafficking in persons? It's important to recognize the signs of trafficking, and reporting it is appropriately, reporting it appropriately is crucial. So we need to understand the laws, the processes, and who the role players are in South Africa to help in effective intervention and victim support. So what is our role? And when I say our role, I mean not just the National Freedom Network. What is your role as well? Our role is to assist victims in a manner that respects their dignity and perspective, and to educate and raise awareness about trafficking in persons to better identify and manage cases. Now, what I want to do this morning is I really want to get us to understand the context of migration, because migration and human trafficking go hand in hand, and can often lead to trafficking in persons. So migration is a global issue, and it's influenced by economic, social, and security factors. It presents us with political and policy challenges for governments. There are issues including integration, displacement, safe migration, and we obviously have a lot of challenges when it comes to border management. So what is the scale of migration? In 2000, unfortunately, this is the most updated information, but as we get more updated information, we'll share that on our NFN platform under our research sector. So again, I want to encourage you to go onto that platform and go through some of the research that we've posted. But in 2000, there was 173 million migrants worldwide. And in 2017, we had 258 million migrants worldwide. So you can see that it is a growing phenomenon. So what are reasons for migration? Some key points are that it could be voluntary or they could be forced migration. So economic opportunities, family reunification, and education are key points. People who want to escape from violence, terrorism, human rights violations. And then there's also environmental factors like climate change and natural disasters. So when it comes to reasons for migration, we have push and pull factors. So push factors would be negative reasons that are pushing people to migrate, and pull factors are positive, and that is why people would want to come to a place like South Africa. So looking at these push factors, why would they want to leave their countries? It could be conflict and violence. There could be poverty and lack of opportunities, environmental degradation, and then pull factors could be economic opportunities, safety and security, and then also family reunification. So what are some of the key takeaways? Migration is a complex, multifaceted issue, and understanding these push and pull factors really help us in policy formulation. Effective migration management would require a balanced approach. So again, looking at why people migrate. Migration is really rising due to civil and transnational conflicts, resulting in both internal and cross-border movements. And so while refugees and internally displaced people may not constitute the majority, they are highly vulnerable and in urgent need of assistance. And we see that traffickers often target these vulnerable populations by exploiting their precarious situations for financial gain. So let's look at some of the different areas. So firstly, we could have social reasons that are providing push and pull factors. So in a social context, a push factor could be a better life elsewhere, or being uprooted from a known environment. A pull factor could be, and we see this often, better living conditions, a need for younger labor, the idea of glamour and excitement elsewhere, and promises of a better life. And I also want to say that we don't only see this cross-border, we also see this nationally, where people are being pulled from areas like Gauteng to Cape Town, for example, under the guise of better opportunities, and the glamour and excitement and promises of a better life. In terms of push factors, there could also be a breakdown of family ties like divorce, abandonment, etc., discrimination, gender, age, race, sexual orientation, national or ethnic groups, religion, and disability. Pull factors could be a lack of information, marriage, family ties, and better medical care. In the political sphere, in terms of push factors, people can leave their country due to war or armed conflict. We see large numbers of foreign military, safety and security leaving due to corruption, weak border controls, lack of anti-trafficking laws, poor social services, and political oppression. And then a pull factor could be, again, to avoid corruption, coming to a peaceful environment. Pull factors can also be negative in the sense that it seems like a pull factor because there's poor border control. So it seems like a good opportunity to be able to cross our borders and come to a place like South Africa for what we mentioned, better opportunities. We also see political and religious freedom, and people can also, a pull can also be in terms of trafficking in persons, is bringing people into a country with weak anti-trafficking laws. Now, I must say South Africa does have really strong legislation when it comes to trafficking in persons. However, we are having a challenge with the implementation of those anti-trafficking laws. Then in terms of the economic sphere, a push factor could be a need for unskilled or semi-skilled labor, organized crime, poverty, high unemployment, a lack of education, or a loss of livelihood. And a pull factor could be that our country has a demand for cheap, unskilled labor. We see that there is a global sex industry, so there's a demand in our country. Industrial development, better job opportunities, and a better chance of earning money. People are also coming for the hope of a chance of better education. And again, that is where vulnerabilities can be exploited. We've had several cases where people have been promised better education. They've left their country, for example, Nigeria, and then they've come to South Africa with the hope of a better education. But when they arrive, they are then forced into a situation of domestic servitude, and sometimes even sexual exploitation. Okay, then in terms of other areas, again, we can just look at poor living conditions and few opportunities to migrate. And a pull factor, again, better living conditions and established patterns of migration. So how does this abuse of vulnerability in human trafficking take place? Let's try and understand that and how traffickers exploit victims' vulnerabilities. Part of understanding trafficking is learning how human traffickers abuse this vulnerability. And the abuse of vulnerability is any abuse that leads a person to believe that they have no other option but to submit to exploitation. So what are some of the vulnerabilities that can be exploited by traffickers? And some of these vulnerabilities include being undocumented or in the country illegally. So we see that people are often threatened that if they try and leave a situation, they will be arrested because they are undocumented. So traffickers use this as a tactic to keep victims in their situations. Someone could also be pregnant and thus be vulnerable. They could have a disability. They could have a substance addiction. And we often see in trafficking in persons that victims are forced to use substances and become dependent, and therefore they are able to be controlled to stay in that situation. And we sometimes see victims actually leave shelters because of this addiction if they don't get the assistance that they need and the support that they need to overcome that substance addiction. Another vulnerability could be being a child, being orphaned, unaccompanied, or separated from your family. Then there's also social, political, or economic instability. And so we see that sometimes victims would rather remain in the situation that they are in rather than going back to a country like the Congo where there's still war and conflict going on. Another vulnerability is someone who has a history of physical or sexual violence, especially among women and adolescents. So what is the link to migration and these push and pull factors? So some of the vulnerabilities that traffickers take advantage of include the vulnerabilities that we've listed above, and they often intersect with migration, push and pull factors. So people may be forced to migrate due to violence, instability, or a lack of opportunities, and then traffickers exploit those conditions, targeting individuals with few or no support systems. So understanding this link is essential to recognize and address human trafficking risks. Let's now look at the definition of human trafficking. And I just want to pause here for a minute and encourage you that if you have any questions at this point, please post it in the chat. And once we get to the Q&A section, we can also just have a look at some of the questions you might have posed already. So the definition of human trafficking or trafficking in persons. Trafficking in persons is an offence in South Africa, and it's defined in Act number 7 of 2013. The constitutive elements of the crime is the acts, the means, and the purpose, and I'll illustrate this below. So the act is any person who delivers, recruits, transports, transfers, harbors, sells, exchanges, leases, or receives another person within or across the South African borders. So it doesn't have to be from country to country. The act can also take place within our country, so from one province to another. So in terms of harboring, I just want to clarify what harboring would mean. That would mean moving someone from one location, moving a victim of trafficking from one location to another, keeping them there for a time being, and then moving them again. So they've been harbored in a specific location before they get moved again. Then in terms of the means, so the means would be by means of threat of harm, the threat or use of force or other forms of coercion, the abuse of vulnerability, fraud, deception, abduction. And I just want to pause there and say that abduction is one of the lowest percentages in terms of the means that we've seen um, in trafficking in persons. Kidnapping, the abuse of power is a really big one. And then the direct or indirect giving or receiving of payments or benefits to obtain the consent of a person having control or authority over another person. Now, that is quite a mouthful. And so I just want to give an example of that. So what we've seen I'm based in Cape Town, and so there's a community called Atlantis, and we had cases there where parents consented to their daughters being sexually exploited in exchange for things like groceries. So there was the direct or indirect giving or receiving of payments or benefits, and in this case, groceries, to obtain the consent of a person, the parent, who had control or authority over another person, which was the child. So I hope that makes sense, and please make note of any questions that you might have around that. And then the direct or indirect giving or receiving of payments and compensation, rewards, benefits, or any other advantage. So just an example again, we see that in the labor trafficking sector, for example, we used to always back in the day speak about the dopstelsel. And so basically what that was is that in exchange for working on the farm, the farmers would be rewarded or paid with alcohol instead of finances. And that still happens in South Africa. And that is seen as a means and trafficking in persons because they need to be paid in terms of monetary compensation. So this is aimed at either the person or an immediate family member of that person or any other person in close relationship to that person. So again, we're going to delve into this a little bit deeper to clarify some of this because I know, like I said, it is a mouthful to remember. So let's look at the purpose. So I've now said that there's already 3 elements for us to look at when it comes to trafficking in persons. So firstly, we looked at the act, we looked at the means, and now we're going to look at the purpose. So the purpose is the purpose of any form or manner of exploitation. That person is then guilty of the offense of trafficking in persons. In the definition of trafficking in persons, the concept exploitation includes, but is not limited to, all forms of slavery or practices similar to slavery, like sexual exploitation, servitude, forced labor, child labor as defined in Section 1 of the Children's Act, the removal of body parts, or the impregnation of a female person against her will for the purpose of selling her child when the child is born. So again, I really want this to stick with you. So in order for a case to be seen as a case of trafficking in persons, you have to have an act. So any person who has been delivered, recruited, transported, transferred, harbored, sold, exchanged, leased, or received by another person. There has to be a means. So again, the threat of use of force or forms of coercion, which we'll get into, the abuse of vulnerability, fraud, deception, abduction, kidnapping, the abuse of power, and then we've spoken about direct or indirect giving or receiving of payments and benefits to obtain the consent of a person having control or authority over another person. So there has to be an act, a means, and then the purpose is the type of exploitation that we see. So the type of human trafficking that is taking place. So the definition provided in the TIP Act is aligned to the United Nations Protocol to prevent, suppress, and punish trafficking in persons, especially women and children. And it's also called the Trafficking Protocol. So again, here you can visually see that TIP has 3 elements. However, it's very important to understand that the definition does not rely on the victim's own definition of themselves as a victim, or that they may have consented to it, but rather it considers that victims may be coerced, threatened, and or assaulted to get their consent or cooperation. And also the purpose may not have taken place, but the intent to exploit should be evident or become evident through investigation. So let's look at coercion and what coercion means. Coercion is commonly used by traffickers in the recruitment and holding of a victim of trafficking. And there are 2 methods used: physical and non-physical coercion. So physical coercion could include things like assault, rape, burning someone. So burning someone with cigarettes. We've had someone being burnt with their hand on a stove. Several really just gruesome things that we've encountered. Physical assault, being kicked, hit with objects, dragged by their hair, or being punched. Non-physical coercion includes things like deception or false promises, having that person control their money. We also see debt bondage, so charging of fines for wrongdoings. And here I just want to mention that debt bondage can also be inherited. So if I had a father who worked on a farm and was indebted to someone, and his labor was basically for free in order to pay off a debt, and something happens to my father, then that debt can then be passed on to me. I inherit it, and then basically I am now under debt bondage. So that is a type of trafficking. Then more examples of physical coercion, abduction, locking someone up and not allowing them to go out, not letting them leave or move around freely, and deliberately limiting food, water, and sleep. In terms of non-physical coercion, we see a lot of shaming and instilling of fear through inconsistent behavior. And this means that the trafficker really uses cruelty to instill fear, but then sometimes uses kindness to instill loyalty and caring on the part of the victim of trafficking. So I've had cases where I have done an assessment with a potential victim of trafficking, and I've literally sat and heard them explain the acts, the means, the purpose. They've explained the type of coercion that they've been experiencing, but they will still say things like, but he loves me, but he's treated me better than anyone has treated me before. So we really see that there is such subtle coercion taking place and inconsistent behavior to keep them controlled. More examples of physical coercion: denying the victim privacy, denying them exercise or even personal cleanliness, so not providing them with soap, toothpaste, clothes, for example, and then non-physical coercion, controlling their relationships and keeping victims from their family and friends. So that is often a something that you can look for to identify whether someone is being coerced, if they are potentially in a trafficking in person situation where they're being isolated, where they're being controlled, and keeping them from their friends and family. Then moving people around so they don't know where they are and are disoriented. Recently, I evaluated a case where one victim was moved 21 times during her trafficking experience. And so this also breaks any social bonds that they may have or may develop. And then lastly, in terms of non-physical coercion, we also unfortunately see corruption, and that leads to the victim distrusting law enforcement or distrusting government authorities and not believing that they can go to them for help. We also see the use of cultural practices like ukutwala and juju rituals to control victims and keep them in exploitative situations. So we've seen such fear in terms of juju that the victims are too scared to leave that situation because they are fearful of what has been told to them will happen if they are to leave this situation. And so just a little bit about juju, that is where a victim would drink what is called a muti, and we see this in countries like Nigeria, where they then believe because they drank this muti and said that they will go through with coming to South Africa and working for a specific person, that if they don't go through with that, then something bad will happen to one of their family members, for example. So all of this is done to make the victim feel hopeless and powerless. And the victim is often too mentally and physically weak to resist the trafficker. Now let's look at child trafficking. The TIP Act only requires two elements to be present for child trafficking. So remember, we looked at three elements so far. We spoke about the act, the means, and the purpose. But when it comes to child trafficking, only the act and the purpose needs to be present in order for it to be classified as a case of trafficking in persons. So the element of means falls away. And the reason for that is because children are by nature vulnerable. Okay, so if there is a case and the act and the purpose, the type of exploitation can be proven, it will be classified as a case of trafficking in persons. So why is the means excluded in child trafficking cases? I've now already said that they are inherently vulnerable, and also they may lack the capacity to make informed decisions. They're more susceptible to manipulation and influence by authority figures. You can think about cases where parents are receiving groceries or money when because their child is being exploited, because they're allowing that exploitation to happen. And so for a child to then testify against their parents saying that they are exploiting them is a really, really hard thing to do. And so we see that happening more often than we would like to. So in cases involving children, proving the means, like I said, so any type of coercion or fraud is not required to establish trafficking. Then distinguishing trafficking from smuggling is also something important for us to look at. So uncertainty may arise in determining whether a child is a victim of trafficking or if this child has been smuggled. And so we need to focus on identifying signs of exploitation and control rather than means used. So let's look at understanding human smuggling and what the risks are for smuggled migrants. So human smuggling involves the illegal entry of individuals into a country that is not their origin without the necessary documentation. Smugglers charge migrants to arrange their transport across borders, and this is typically done by avoiding official border controls and entry requirements and by providing fraudulent documents. Now, the risks for smuggled migrants are that they face severe life-threatening risks like suffocation in confined spaces, dying in deserts or remote areas, and even dehydration and drowning at sea. So smuggling versus trafficking, what is the difference? After arrival, once a smuggled migrant reaches their destination, they are generally free to continue their lives. However, the smuggling process fuels organized crime and corruption. Now, the link between smuggling and trafficking, while smuggling involves voluntary migration, traffickers will often use smuggling to exert control over their victims. So understanding the distinction between smuggling and trafficking is crucial to identify and support victims of trafficking. Why does it matter? It matters because smuggled migrants can become victims of trafficking, and deporting a victim of trafficking removes crucial evidence, making it harder to prosecute traffickers. So the reason that we're saying that is because we often see that at our airport hubs, we might see potential cases of trafficking in persons, but those victims are immediately, or potential victims are immediately deported back. They're not allowed entry into the country. But proper investigation is not taking place to actually determine if it was a potential case of trafficking or not. So traffickers exploit the lack of awareness amongst our officials and using smuggling to conceal their criminal activities. So let's look at the act, the means, and the purpose and how it differs between smuggling and trafficking. So with smuggling, with the act, yes, there's transport. Someone is transferred, someone is received, and someone could potentially be harbored. With trafficking, there's recruitment, there's transport, transfer, harboring, and receipt. Then the means, so how it happens. With smuggling, it's voluntary or consensual, and there's an exchange of funds in return for illegal services, and it includes some deceit. But with trafficking, there's threat, coercion, abduction, fraud, deception, abuse of power, and there's never valid consent by a victim of trafficking. So again, I'm going to reiterate, no one can consent to being a victim of trafficking. So in terms of the purpose of activity, with smuggling, yes, there's profit from illegal movement of these individuals over international borders. And with trafficking, there's the exploitation of the individual or individuals. There's forced labor, slavery, servitude, and sexual exploitation. Then in terms of entry, with smuggling, there's an illegal border crossing. But with trafficking, it can be legal or illegal, or there could be no border crossing at all, because human trafficking can take place within a town, within a suburb, a province, within South Africa. Then looking at documents, who the crime is against and just an example. With smuggling, the documents are illegal, so it could be false or stolen. And with trafficking, again, as we mentioned, it can be legal or illegal. Now, smuggling is a crime against the state, but trafficking is a crime against the individual. So in terms of prosecution, it is prosecuted differently. An example of smuggling: a group of Malawian citizens pay what we call a broker a fee to get them from Zimbabwe to South Africa via an escorted river crossing. Once they are across the border, they then separate and they start looking for work. But with trafficking, we see a different scenario playing out. Young girls from the Northern Cape are taken to places like Kuruman on the promise of a holiday job. Once they are there, they are locked up in a room, their cell phones are confiscated, and they're forced into prostitution to service the many foreigners in the town. So there's no separation. They're not going their own way. They've been deceived. We can already see that there was an act, so they were taken. That could mean abduction. It could mean that they were being there was deceit in terms of this false opportunity and the promises of a better lifestyle. And once they were there, they were harbored, they were received by someone. Any contact that they have with the outside world was completely cut off, and they were forced. So we see all of those things that we spoke about in terms of the means, and the type of exploitation would then be sexual exploitation. Okay, I'm just going to pause there a second just to take a little sip. So framing our anti-trafficking response and what is the objective? So we need to explore the protective measures that we have in place, and we need to focus on things like the South African Bill of Rights and following a victim-centered approach. And I think this is really where your work comes in. This framework ensures that victims of crime are treated with dignity, that they are protected from re-traumatization, and that they are provided with access to essential services and restorative justice. A human rights approach, looking at that and a foundation for protection, we need to again look at the South African Bill of Rights, which upholds human dignity, equality, and freedom for all individuals, regardless of their status. So whether this victim of trafficking is a citizen, if they're an asylum seeker, a foreigner, an adult, or a child, there is an obligation to protect. So as officials, we are urged to protect, promote, and fulfill these rights, ensuring that all victims are treated fairly and with respect. So how do we follow a victim-centered approach? South Africa's high incidence of violence and crime negatively impacts on our efforts to build respect for human rights and to foster a culture of safety and security. There's a heightened sense of fear and distrust, which is worsened by unacceptable poor responses from the criminal justice system and or for victim support services. So how do we adopt a victim-centered approach? This acknowledges that many of the crimes committed against victims, including rape, robbery, assault, or kidnapping, is dehumanizing and it's traumatic. It aims to lessen further victimization. It aims to build empathy and respect by recognizing the experience of the victims from their point of view, and it aims to effectively assist and empower victims. So defining a victim. A victim refers to any individual who has experienced harm, whether physical, emotional, economic, or a violation of fundamental rights as a result of criminal acts or omissions. This definition extends to indirect victims, including immediate family members, dependents, neighbors, or colleagues affected by the crime. And there are guiding principles of a victim-centered approach. And to effectively adopt a victim-centered approach, we need to consider the following 7 key principles. So firstly, we have to look at empowerment. So all service providers need to create an environment that provides opportunities for victims to make informed decisions, build support networks, and access necessary resources in promoting agency within the person. Then in terms of human rights, victims need to be respected as unique human beings with human rights and treated accordingly as outlined in the Constitution. Number 3, participation and self-determination. Victims need to be given the opportunity to participate in any activity directly related to their empowerment. And this includes participation in all stages of the criminal justice procedure in line with their needs. And we often see that victims in our shelters are not included in that process. And this can be due to a lack of communication from the investigating officer or the prosecutor to the victim and to the social worker. Then number 4, a family-centered approach. Immediate family independence of the victim must be included in the process as indirect victims and potential family support systems of the primary victim. Number 5, accountability, effectiveness, and efficiency. Service providers need to be involved with victims and perpetrators of crime. Service providers involved with victims and perpetrators of crime are responsible for appropriate, efficient, and quality service provisions. And then number 6, restorative justice. The system should allow for mediation, dialogue, negotiation, and problem solving in pursuing justice and healing. And then lastly, we need to follow a multidisciplinary approach. So we need to recognize and address the diverse needs of victims through the integration and coordination of various role players in the process. So what's important to note is that there is a service charter for victims of crime in South Africa. This promotes justice for victims of crime in South Africa, and it's in line with and supports our laws around the rights of and services provided to victims of crime. So every victim of crime has the right to the following: to be treated with fairness and respect for dignity and privacy, to be offered information during their criminal investigation and trial, to receive information, to have protection, so freedom from intimidation, harassment, abuse, and placement in a witness protection program. And unfortunately, again, that's not really something that we're seeing a lot of in South Africa. Number 5, assistance. So they have the right to interpreters, legal advisors, counselors, and any other service providers necessary for the needs of the victim. Compensation. So they have the right to compensation for the loss or damage to property suffered as a result of the crime committed against them. And then lastly, restitution. So in the case of unlawful dispossession or damage of goods or property after the accused has been convicted. Then just looking at the principles of the Victims' Charter, and we're almost coming to a conclusion, and then we can go into the Q&A. The success of dealing with trafficking in persons and reducing this crime really relies on partnership and following the right procedures and having a victim-centered approach. So according to the directives of the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development, Officials must be sensitive to the vulnerability of children, women, people with disabilities, persons with albinism, and persons with a specific sexual orientation. So the following figure underpins the key requirements of this approach. So we need close collaboration, networking with, and strengthening of relationships between government departments. We need a uniform and thorough understanding of and training in the legal, humanitarian, and other requirements for dealing with all aspects of cases of victims of trafficking. We need a thorough knowledge of and attention to our own role of departmental roles and responsibilities, and a unilateral compliance and effective prosecution of perpetrators across all provinces. So understanding the national policy framework on trafficking in persons. So now that we've explored the human rights and the victim-centered approach, let's just quickly delve into the prevention and combating of trafficking in persons national policy framework. So what is the national policy framework? The South African government has committed to preventing human trafficking, protecting victims, and prosecuting perpetrators through a comprehensive multi-agency response as outlined in the National Policy Framework. And there's the 4 Ps. So they're the 4 key pillars to effectively address trafficking in persons. And that is prevention, protection, prosecution, and partnership. So prevention, these are strategies aimed at stopping trafficking before it occurs through public awareness, education, and targeted interventions. Protection, ensuring the safety, support, and recovery of victims of trafficking through access to essential services. Prosecution, strengthening the legal frameworks to hold traffickers accountable and deliver justice for victims. And then lastly, partnership, fostering collaboration between government entities, NGOs, law enforcement, and community stakeholders to combat trafficking effectively. So the process and the role players. The Trafficking in Persons Act was established as a structured process for identifying, investigating, and managing cases of trafficking in persons, and assigning specific roles and responsibilities to relevant departments. Now, this framework aims to ensure a coordinated and more effective response grounded in a human rights and victim-centered approach. And the following diagram that I'm going to show you illustrates the trafficking in persons management process across 4 phases. So immediate, short-term, mid-term, and long-term. And it highlights the lead and supporting departments involved in each case. So this image is a lot to take in. I'm just going to pause here for a second. So here you can see on the left the immediate, short, midterm, and long-term processes. And this image will also show you which government department is responsible for what. So which government department needs to identify and report, which government department needs to refer the case, who needs to extract and protect the victim, who needs to do the assessment, who does the investigation. Then there's care and management. Who's responsible long-term for the prosecution of the case? Who does the compensation and sentencing? And then who is responsible for the return and reintegration or repatriation of the victim of trafficking? So this presentation, I'm sure Anissa, can be shared with the participants so that you have this image available to you and can refer to it if need be.
Yes,
So
sure.
just
Thank you so much, Renee. Thank you so much for that. So
you're welcome.
yes, whoever's attended, we can send the presentation.
Right. So just to kind of end things off, I just want to quickly look at these phases and what they're about. So if you'll just allow me 5 more minutes, then we can go into the Q&A. So the identify and report phase is quite self-explanatory, and it's about identifying if people are suspected of being a victim of trafficking. So we talk about a suspected victim of trafficking, and there a basic screening and reporting to SAPS needs to take place. Now, this needs to be done by any official government department and can be done by any member of the community. So any person can talk to someone on the street once they've become aware of trafficking in persons and go, this actually sounds to me like a human trafficking case. I can go and report it to SAPS, and they can then do the further identification of this suspected victim of trafficking. The referral then needs to take place. And I do want to mention that the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development and the rapid response team in each province needs to then come up with a way forward in terms of collaboration with the role players that are involved in the referral of the case. When it comes to extract and or protect, this is where SAPS will evaluate the risk to the suspected victim of trafficking in terms of their safety and health. If there are risks identified, they'll need to come up with a course of action and conduct the extraction or place someone in witness protection or a shelter. And so a suspected victim is often placed in temporary safe care. Again, it's important, and I'm sure this is information that you know, that the suspected victim of trafficking needs to be referred to the Department of Health for a medical examination and care. There are accredited NGOs for temporary safe care, and that is where the Department of Social Development will place these victims of trafficking or suspected victims of trafficking. And then the Department of Home Affairs is assigned to actually assist the victim if they're a foreign national and if a visa is required. Now, I do want to mention that that part of our legislation is still lacking, and we are not yet seeing foreign national victims who are in shelters being assisted with a visa, and it is creating quite a lot of complications. But we know that they are trying to make progress with that part of the legislation to have it implemented. And in our last provincial task team meeting, I know that in the Western Cape, they've done a test case where a temporary visa has been extended to a foreign national victim of trafficking. Then investigation, it's obviously about SAPS gathering the evidence for the prosecution of traffickers and their accomplices. And so this will start with an initial interview of the suspected victim. And it's just important to mention that accredited organizations, again, the victim needs to be placed at an accredited shelter through the Department of Social Development. And once they are there, the Hawks is usually the SAPS unit that would then come and actually do an assessment and interview to determine if it is a victim of trafficking. If it's not a case of trafficking in persons for forced labor, then DAL will take the lead in terms of the investigation. In terms of the assessment, designated social workers need to assess whether a suspected victim of trafficking is a victim or not. So for children, it's done through the Children's Court. For adults, an assessment is done by a designated social worker, and once confirmed, the adult victim will then be issued with what we call a letter of recognition. Now, this may be withdrawn at any stage. So if a suspected victim is not confirmed as a victim of trafficking, they are referred to other departments or organizations as required, but the suspected victim has the right to appeal the decision if they are not found to be a victim of trafficking. Then care and management. This is about providing ongoing care and support. Various role players are involved to look at a needs analysis. So this involves the safe accommodation of an adult victim of trafficking in these accredited organizations. Ongoing psychosocial support is needed, healthcare is needed, legal assistance as and when required, and skills development for reintegration. Then I'm not going to go into the prosecution now. However, you're welcome to contact me for any questions with regards to that. But obviously, just the NPA is the lead in terms of prosecution, and then compensation and sentencing needs to be requested for the victim of trafficking and the state. Then in terms of repatriation, who takes the lead is that the Department of Social Development will take the lead in this process with the support of DIRCO, ISS, the Department of Home Affairs, and NGOs. But I think it's also really important to just note that one, all children need to be escorted. Two, there needs to be communication to all role players involved in the case before repatriation is done. And then if the victim of trafficking has received healthcare, it's important that a discharge summary is just provided so that they can continue to receive healthcare back at home. And then reintegration is obviously just about making sure that they reintegrate into their community, and it might include the accessing of social grants. So I think we can see here that a multi-level response and role players is needed in TIP case management. And this last diagram that I'm going to show you before I end off is basically just a comprehensive multi-level and multi-agency strategy for effectively, firstly, identifying, managing, and prosecuting cases of trafficking in persons. So again, just like in the previous diagram, you'll have access to this image. Please print it out, put it in your shelters, and it highlights the key role players involved in the structured process that is required by the Trafficking in Persons Act so that we can ensure a coordinated, victim-centered response. And when this process is implemented effectively, it actually approaches and prioritizes the safety, dignity, and rights of victims while facilitating the successful prosecution of offenders. So I think it's going to be a little hard to see everything outlined in the presentation just as it is here. So I will see if I can get a higher resolution image of this and send it to you, Anissa, for distribution. But it's very important that this is the process flow that is followed when there is a suspected victim of trafficking, and then what happens if it's determined that it's not a case of trafficking in persons. So in conclusion, in this topic, you've now looked at migration and how the political, economic, social, and environmental factors increases the vulnerability to being trafficked. You now also have a clear definition of trafficking in persons for adults and children, and an overview of the process for managing TIP cases. So what should be evident is that this crime requires departments and civil society to work together in the prevention of exploitation, the protection of victims of trafficking, and the prosecution of traffickers. And so thank you so much for your attention. Please stay safe. But I know we're going to go into a Q&A now, so I will just stop sharing my screen. And I see the chat box has been quite busy, so Anissa, I don't know if you want to highlight anything that you might have seen in the chat box. But I'm happy to take questions if anyone wants to raise their hand and ask me a specific question.
Thank you so much, Renee, for a very, very comprehensive presentation. There's lots of information to take in. I think everybody who's here definitely understands that human trafficking is a very complex matter. It requires like you said, multidisciplinary, multi-level. Everybody needs to be involved, all the departments, government departments and organizations. So, I think this for a lot of us are an entry point into understanding human trafficking and what is it that we can be doing. I think from the National Shelter Movement of South Africa as well, shelters and gender-based violence. We are getting survivors. Not all shelters are dealing with trafficking in persons, particularly. I think this might also be a little bit of intimidation around it. And not knowing what to do, and can be a bit overwhelming for a lot of people. So I'm hoping that this presentation gives some insight with the view to possibly opening ourselves up to being more equipped to deal with victims of human trafficking. I am going to open the floor for questions. If there's anyone who wants to, you can unmute and ask. Alternatively, if you want to use the chat box to type up your question, I will keep an eye out for questions and Renee can possibly answer it.
I'm going to, I see someone asked if I could share my email address.
Yes.
So I am sharing that in the chat box. So please feel free
I know also
to...
someone asked, sorry. Someone
Okay.
asked for the registration list as well. I don't know if everybody will be comfortable with sharing of the registration list. But thank you for Renee for making yourself accessible to participants by sharing your email.
Not a problem. I'm just going through the screen to see if there are any hands raised, if anyone has any questions or
Let's see.
comments.
Well, I'm happy with the amount of information they received.
I'm glad. I know it's a lot of information to take in. And like I said, I have shared this presentation with Anissa, and so you're welcome to share it with the participants, and they're welcome to connect with me if they have any questions at a later stage. And as I said, please go and visit our website, which is www.nfn.org.za, and go and have a look at our online platform, because it is such a great resource tool where you can actually monthly, we have webinars that you can join, and we cover different topics that I think is appropriate for any type of shelter to attend. And I understand that not all of the shelters in attendance today, necessarily takes in specifically victims of trafficking, but you might come across a case where someone has not self-identified, and I think it's important to then be able to recognize those signs and follow the processes appropriately. And then also, as I mentioned, we do have a research platform on that hub, where you can look at the latest policies and protocols that have been put in place. So please look at becoming a member of the National Freedom Network, so that you can have an access to all of those resources.
Thanks for that, Renee. I think one of the biggest advantages for me particularly would be the National Freedom Network as an important support system in helping us deal with human trafficking should we encounter it. I know it's all over. A lot of us, like I said, there's a bit of intimidation around it. So I'm hoping that maybe through this and through your support, people will be able to identify, act appropriately, provide services or access those services.
Mm,
I'm not seeing any questions. I don't know, but there is a one hand raised. You can go ahead and unmute.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I hope I'm audible. I'm driving. Am I audible?
Yes, you
yes.
are. You are. Please go
Okay.
ahead.
I am Tibisa Mudise. I am a lecturer at the National University of Lesotho. I don't work for any shelter just yet. I'm just trying to get affiliated with one. But a colleague shared this link with me because I want to venture into, I want to do some research into human trafficking in Lesotho. Human trafficking in Lesotho is very under researched and it is rife. So I was wondering if there's a way maybe I could liaise with one of you guys, maybe learn a thing or two for my research, and also to maybe liaise with shelters in South Africa and find a way that we could maybe work together with shelters in Lesotho.
Yes, so definitely you can go onto our website and you'll find our email address there. It's just info@nfn.org.za. I see my colleague Marina has just posted it in the chat. And so anyone that is interested in research can connect with us. And we will then take you through our vetting process and connect you with our partners who will then be able to assist you in your research. So please go ahead and connect with us. And I think it's a wonderful initiative that you're
Thank you
about to embark on.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Liba Singh, for your attendance all the way from Lesotho. Thank you for sharing that with us. Just out of interest, though, also the National Shelter Movement of South Africa is in the process of reaching out to our neighboring countries, including Lesotho and Namibia. We actually have delegates coming through next week for a training. So also in the GBV space, we're trying to create support platforms and networks with countries in and around South Africa. So yes, I'm sure that would also create another collaboration, and it all at the end, I think we're all working towards the same thing, and that's trying to help victims and survivors of gender-based violence, human trafficking. So yes, thank you for that.
That is wonderful. That is wonderful.
Anissa, you've muted yourself.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any other questions.
Okay.
Okay. I don't know if there's no other comments, no questions. All I know is there's a lot of positive responses in the chat, a lot of thank yous for an informative session. Thank you everybody for taking the time to attend this webinar. It's been extremely worthwhile. We've learned a lot, and I hope that you will keep on looking out for our future webinars. We do have them once a month. usually at the 9 to 10:30 slot. Renee, thank you so much for sharing your time, your expertise, for all the information, for allowing us to share the presentation. We definitely will be in touch with you. It's the beginning of building our relationship. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, again. Enjoy the rest of your day and take care. Bye.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.